On this episode of the Camp Owners Podcast, we have the one, the only Nelson Strickland. Nelson Strickland, you may know him from camp conferences, from some of his awesome sessions. You may know him from Summer Camp Society. You may know him from being on the board at Camp Jameson. You may know him from being that incredible DJ at Tri-State. But how you are going to know him during this recording is as someone who is obsessed with camp in the very best way and is always pushing himself and others to think deeply, which I love about him, but thinking deeply about how can we grow? How can we continue to improve and get better? And isn't that really what camp is all about? Nelson is talking with us today about how we can create spaces of candor at our camps with our staff and campers. He's going to talk to us about learning circles. He's going to talk to us about identifying weak links. He's going to talk about how camp directors are so good at saying no, but what are you really saying no to and what are you saying yes to? So we hope you enjoy this conversation. Nelson always makes us think deeply, which we appreciate. It's never long enough when chatting with him, but take a listen and enjoy. We know that we loved it.
This is the Camp Owners Podcast from Go Camp Pro, exploring best practices and issues that professionals in the private camp industry face every day. You can find our show notes at gocamp.pro/ownerspod. Your mission is campers. Whereabouts' mission is making their experience coordinated and connected. Whereabouts is the only camper management system that keeps parents, admin, and staff in sync in real time, so every camper's day runs with confidence, clarity, and care. Check them out today at whereaboutsapp.io.
Welcome to the Camp Owners Podcast, a space for camp owners to talk about the unique aspects of camp ownership and get inspired by each other. We sit down with camp industry experts, leaders, and fellow camp owners and industry experts to discuss the big issues in the private camp world. Hi, everybody. My name is Howie Grossinger, and I am the co-owner and director of Camp Robin Hood in the suburbs of Toronto.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Schuna. I am the co-owner and executive director of Hidden Pines Ranch Day Camp located in Stillwater, Minnesota. If you're looking to find and subscribe to the Camp Owners Podcast, you can find us either online at gocamp.pro/ownerspod or by searching for us in your favorite podcast app. If you're listening to this and thinking, oh my gosh, it's life-changing, or you just really like listening to us, please encourage other camp owners, directors, or aspiring camp professionals in your circle to listen. Also want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Camptivities. We are so grateful for Ryan and his crew by sponsoring our podcast, keeping the lights on, but also providing awesome tech tools for camps. And we're just really grateful, Camptivities. Howie, how are you?
I'm good, Kelly. Great to see you. We are recording this in December, year end. We're closing out 2025 with a really great guest and a really great topic. How's December treating you?
If my hair wasn't in a pony, it might be straight out, just the holidays of,
Yeah.
last night we did the put kids' presents in a pile and you're like, crap, that one has too much. Okay, what are we gonna buy for this one? Even though I said 5 things, I literally was like, something you want, something you need, something to wear, something to read. Well, yeah, that's not, I'm trying, but
Yeah. Kelly,
equality now when it comes to your children is how it
yeah.
still is in this. But how are you?
Well, what's fair and equal are two different things. We've learned that in the Camp Owners Podcast, correct?
Yes. Yes, we have.
Absolutely. Things
Yeah.
are great. We're both in two locations where we've got lots of snow in December, which is great. Hopefully the snow sticks around for Christmas and over New Year's, which will be great. And just wanted to wish everybody a happy holidays as we just get this going. I'm excited for you to introduce our guest.
I am too. Today we have a first-time guest to our podcast. We have Nelson Strickland to the Camp Owners Podcast. Nelson is currently the technology coordinator. Yep, he's getting a little arm. What do you call that? Arm. I want to be like,
That's a rally. That's a
He's
fist
rallying,
bump
getting
rally.
it going. Let's go.
Yeah,
what it is.
that's a let's go fist rally.
Yes, yes. I'm dramatically reading his actions. It is a let's go. So currently, besides doing that, Nelson is the technology coordinator for Woodstock Day School and board chair of Camp Jameson. We're super excited to have him share his insight and experience on a variety of topics from working at and with camps. Welcome to the show, Nelson. We're so happy you're here. Give us a little bit of your camp story for all of our guests who aren't familiar with the great person that you are.
Absolutely. Let's go. We're gonna come up with a name for that move by the end of this, by the way. That's already in the docket right there as well. But yeah, no, it is this is I'm excited, if you can't tell. I'm excited. And I would probably summarize my like camp journey so far as like just like the kid that has never left. That's essentially that's it. And in a nutshell. And so at age 11, my mom was like, "You're going to camp," and then I was like, "No, I'm not." And then you clearly know how that one went. And then, but as soon as I got there, it felt like it felt like being dropped into a video game. And so I'm a big nerd. I'm a big gamer, and it felt like being dropped into a video game, like this like big open world, kind of do whatever you want. And this camp was hole in the wall in Connecticut. And so after that, I pretty much just like fell in love with everything that was camp. Like the natural counting down the days, couldn't wait to go back. I ended up working at a camp in the Philadelphia area for the next probably 10 years or so, kind of like climbing through counselor, JC, and worked my way into being a director there. And that was when things really took off because I started getting more opportunities. And so I've traveled around now to multiple states, being a director in Michigan, being a director in the DMV, being a director in New York multiple times. I do staff training all across the nation. And I think the way that I've like summed it down now to folks that I have to like explain, like when they ask, like, well, what do you do? And even if it's like, what do you do the other 9 months, whatever it is. And it might not be the most humble thing, but I just can't, I just purely tell them that I am the best camp director in the world, which probably not true, but like to them, for their frame of reference, like that's okay. And so I think I'm definitely very versatile, is what I'll say. And I like the word versatile. And so that is like my camp story, kind of like the beginnings right now. I am board chair for Camp Jameson. We're an affordable summer camp for children in the greater Philadelphia area. We just completed our 15th summer
Wow.
this summer, and this was the first year that we ran 2 weeks instead of 1 week. And so not only that was at the 15th celebration, but we doubled up. And we also just got some really great news to continue into 2026 and beyond. And
Wow.
so that is where I am at right now. And I think when people ask me more about my camp journey, they start to hear and the word that they've started to use is they started to use, "Are you obsessed?" And and like right, a
Maybe.
little bit, like a yeah, yes, 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 maybe,
Yeah.
and maybe. And so I really enjoy the variety of learning that comes with running a camp. I think I like the fact that there's not one way to go about leading your camp. I like the fact that as long as you are striving to get better in any way, really, like
Yeah.
you're becoming a better camp director. You don't really have to, you can kind of pinpoint whether you want to do business or whatever it is, but I think that's where I'm at now. And so that is, I think I told you before we started that I have some questions for you. And so that's kind of like where they're gonna lean is like I'm in this mode where it's like, what do you learn next? What like sends people over the bridge. And so at some point you both went through it where you probably started somewhere and now you're owning camps. And so like that is the question that not only do I have, but that's the question that I get asked from staff from other camps when I go do talks. The biggest question I get is what what can I learn to get better at this? And so I've been doing some digging, and what has been catching my eye has been design theory and
Yeah.
and the idea of how are we as camp leaders really narrating our story and being aware of our blind spots, but also making sure that because once you've done something for like so many years, how do you kind of expand your portfolio? And so that is really as what has been
Mhm.
catching my eye is the idea of how are leaders designing camps to both welcome and embrace the current changes that are happening in the world today,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Uh, and so that's
Totally.
that's that's kind of like where I've landed in this moment.
I
Wow,
love
that's a great, great jumping off point to some of the discussion that I think that we want to have with you for sure. And, as I've gotten to know Nelson, aside from him wearing many hats and providing so much insight to camp pros across North America, and I've seen Kelly, we've got like the ultimate camp hype guy on this podcast right now. Like, if you want energy, Nelson is our guy, and I've seen him in action. I've been to Tri-State.
Yes.
I can't stay up as late as him and his crew, but
But I have seen him DJ, and he is good, and he's a good dancer too.
Yeah,
DJ,
like,
dancer, camp
Sliding
obsessor.
song.
no,
Okay,
it,
no, go on more. No, I'm kidding.
no. Aside from that, we're actually going to dive into some of the things that you talked about, but we talked about Nelson being super versatile, and I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of some of the conversation we're about to have. Kelly, maybe you can start us off with some of the things that, we want to unpack with Nelson in terms of camp today and the things that, are kind of at the heart of what's going to be this discussion.
Yeah. So this really came about from running into Nelson at Wake, which shout out to our Wake people, but that was
Shout out
super
Wake.
exciting to see you on the other coast.
Yeah, that was fun. That was a joy to be there, and it was a pleasant surprise to see you because I didn't know that you were going to be there. I know some people were telling me about, I see this person, you might see this person. Then I saw Kelly, and so that was cool. But I think, and one more shout out to Wake because the community that Wake brings, like for a conference, was something that I've never seen, like unlike any other.
Yeah.
And it felt very welcoming, very very warm. But
Great,
shout out to-
unique
have-
space they create there for sure.
Yeah, they'll be happy to hear that. I think that's a really like a core value of who they are. So that's awesome. So you spoke at Wake, and that was what I was like, ooh, I think that could be a good topic. So you mentioned this a little bit, but for the people listening who, when you talk about perspective portfolios and are like, what does that even mean? Tell us about that. What is that? Define that. Why is that important for leaders? And kind of what did you initially, present when you were talking at Wake about this?
Yep. And so I think what I want to start with is that the perspective portfolio comes from, it's like an idea from the Stanford School of Design, and it is like heavily rooted in design theory. And the clearest way that I can kind of describe design theory would be that, and we talked about this during the talk as well, was that at one point, I love Pixar. At one point, Steve Jobs was the like CEO of Pixar. And Steve Jobs is like incredible when it comes to design theory and creating spaces where desired interactions happen like naturally, right? They're not forced. There isn't a icebreaker that comes and like introduces everybody. And an example of that would be that, and Steve Jobs, I think when Apple was kind of picking up at one point, or maybe in Pixar, I think it might have been, at one point, he designed the entire office to only have one bathroom. So multiple floors, but only one bathroom. And so his idea behind that was that it was a water cooler effect. People were gonna have more engagement at that bathroom because you had to interact with each other. You had to, right? There was no other option. And so another idea is like the Stanford School of Design will have like uncomfortable block seating, and that is to encourage people to stand up because it's uncomfortable to sit down, to encourage people to stand up and mix and mingle. And so that is kind of like the idea of design theory. It is, how can we intentionally design spaces to get a desired result? So that's the design theory that we're talking about. And so the perspective portfolio with that is 8 different ways in which you can expand your perspective to design better. That is what I'm going to talk about. That is what we talked about. And so there are 8 different levers. And so an example of that would be you creating spaces for candor, and learning circles is another one. There's 8. The next one is pen pals, customer as a collaborator. You're going to cultivate weak links. You have inexperienced experience. You have the notice novice, and you have complementary collaborators. And so those are the 8 different levers in which these 2 professors talk about how you can expand your perspective portfolio. And the reason you would do that is, again, to be able to design spaces better and understand where are you kind of having a blind spot to your community, because as you start to grow your camp, as you start to get a larger and larger community, and I'm a fan of both of yours. And so Howie, I know I've been studying Camp Robinson for a while now at this point. And so I know that you have like 6 different kind of camps running all at the same time with like 200 kids in each one. And so like at a certain point, that's like how many people, and that's just the campers, right? And so you have your staff also over. Trust me, I talk to Jordana all the time about how kind of like your camp is like structured, because I'm just fascinated to hear about this mess. In fact, at this point, your camp is Camp Canada to me. Like that's what I think about
You're very
when I think Canadian camp. And so, but that's the whole idea, is to have a framework to be more intentional about how we are designing our camps, how we're designing our spaces. And so I'm not going to talk about all 8 of those. I do want to highlight just like the three that really catch my eye for camp folks and specifically camp owners, and that's going to be creating spaces for candor, learning circles, and cultivating weak links. And those kind of heavily rely into kind of some of this design theory.
Yeah, and it's really interesting when you outline those perspective portfolios and those intentional spaces, the idea that or the application of that, whether you're a 1 week program or a long stay camp, day camp, or overnight camp, it feels like just, and I'm not a student of this, the stuff that you're talking about, but it just captures me. I'd be very curious about, how any format of a camp can embrace aspects of the things you just said, and I'm really curious about some of those things because for some of us who are listening, there'll be, a lot of traditional long form, long stay, overnight or day camps. And yet there are going to be people here who just have lots of turnover every week at their camp. And it feels just here, I'm so intrigued to hear more about your perspective on how any of those things you mentioned might be applied to, different types and ways of organizing the experiences we curate for campers and staff.
Yeah, I think I hear you. I hear you talk about turnover, and that always kind of gets my mind kind of buzzing on how and why a little bit in terms of is it is it is it unavoidable, And so I'm going to continue to display how much of a camp nerd I am, but the like average retention rate for camps across the nation is, I think, 40%, right? 40 to 50% for staff. And so, and then you can also talk about how like the first year is always the year in which campers know if they're going to stay for a while. You can kind of calculate whatever it is, the lifetime of a camper, all those kind of things.
Right.
But I think what has been beneficial in my career and in terms of this has been being able to cultivate those weak links. And so I think, and that's like the most design theory and probably a bit more in the woods. And we'll kind of start in the woods and then work our way out, and kind of get that 30,000-foot view. But when you're talking about like turnover and retention, a lot of it comes from, in my experience, folks just not feeling connected to the space, right? And that can be the people, that can be the program, that can be the leaders. And I have worked with camps specifically on designing programs and spaces that are easy to connect with, and also set up like easy moments to connect with others. And so an example of that is I was the director of operations at TIC, and that's in the DMV. And so I was there for 3 years. And I think this is like post-pandemic. And so this is when like everyone's scared to go outside, right? No one, staff is like very low, staff aren't returning. You're like trying to like scramble, and staffing is already hard enough as is, let alone during that time period. And so I came in with a specific mission of like kind of rebuilding this recruiting pipeline of theirs, and everyone that goes to this camp are just baby geniuses, or this is a camp for creators. And so what we do is teach campers how to do filmmaking or programming or photography and things like that. And so we're finding folks from the DMV, and over time, I think one of like the smallest changes that we did was because we were a day camp that had to move into our facilities. We would usually start out staff training with like just that move in, and we're like just moving in boxes and all of these things, and it kind of felt a little bit like a manual labor camp, right? And when we like, if that's your first impression, and so you can go into all these other things that, again, like anchoring bias and like, but this is the first impression people are getting. And so like if that's the first impression, it makes it like infinitely harder to be connected to a space that you're going to associate with like manual labor when you're expecting to come and be like a software programmer, right? You're expecting to come look at a computer, and the first 3 hours of your day, you're kind of like just picking up and putting down things for 3 hours. And so what we ended up doing was, and this is again, this is design. We just moved it either 2 hours, depending on what we were able to do. We either moved it to the second day of training, or we moved it there, but we were more intentional about making sure that folks were connected to the program and kind of like building our credits before we started kind of taking those back.
Yeah.
And so that's like just a small way of doing that. But I think that's like kind of how design comes into that retention piece, because what you're doing is you are essentially thinking in advance ways in which you can retain staff without having to be there, because you talk about presence, you even said like, I'm very good at bringing energy, right? I know that. I know that about myself, but I
Right.
don't know I bring energy to the people that are surrounded around the table that I'm standing on, you know? Like that's the only way I can bring energy. And so design theory is about how can you make sure that there are pockets of energy or pockets of connection happening when you're not there.
And I think that this whole notion of design theory and the intentionality that I think a lot of us apply just kind of innately through experience now has a name associated with it, right? It's actually a lot of us have been practicing design theory, probably not
100%.
even knowing it, right?
100%. We're design theory experts. We
Right.
are.
Yes.
That's all we actually do. It when you're like crafting those signs that you're gonna put up all over your camp, or you
Right.
are like putting tables like underneath a very nice tree or something like that because you just want to get those pictures, or you're like putting a bench next to the lake so you can get those like pondering thoughts like overlooking, and
Yeah.
that's design theory. That's all
Well,
design theory.
the example that comes to mind, Nelson and Kelly, is I think about design theory applied to staff training, right? Like the onboarding of staff, right? This we met a staff member in February and March. We left them with a great impression, and the last thing we want is for them to feel like they're in like dead space once they get off the bus to day camp staff training. So we intentionally have the drop off of the camp bus, which we bring our staff by school bus into training. We want the greeting table for their name tags to be no more than 10 steps away from them getting off the bus, right?
Yes.
Because the more they walk into our space, looking around and wondering where I go, we've got them in 10 spaces. And it took some time to realize that that could enhance things, but I'm kind of feeling like, yeah, we're on design theory. Let's go. This is
Yeah,
good.
that's it. And so I hope that when we're saying design theory, it's not like, and we're talking about like some institution or like like no, like this is like it's like very graspable, if I'm just gonna make that word up, things that you can talk about.
For
And so
sure.
and so the idea of, and there's a rule a little bit for what you talked about in terms of 10 steps from the thing, 10 steps from the next thing, right? The next thing is a specific like amount of time or distance away. The next thing that needs to capture your attention, the next thing that needs to engage you in this space is only like 10 steps away. And so, like I told you earlier that I'm like a huge nerd, a huge video gamer. And video game creators will use, or developers will use what's called the 40-second rule. And so the 40-second rule is in any kind of open world game. If you've ever played a game that is just like kind of expansive and you can go wherever you want, there's like 50 million markers for like what you can possibly do in this game, right? And it's like a camp map. It's like a big old camp map with like a bunch of things you can do. And you might have Gaga over here, you might have Slip and Slide over here, and you might have Songs and Games with Kelly over here, and you might have Pictionary with Howie over here, right? And there's a big map for your campers. And so the idea is that in this game, the idea is that you're never 40 seconds from going from one engagement to the other, And so that is another like really simple way to implement. And that's what you're already doing with that. Like, I don't want you to get lost and get overwhelmed before you get your name tag, is what I heard you say, Howie. That's what I heard you say. I want you to feel as if you are being taken care of before you have to question it,
Right.
you know?
I like that. I think I'm gonna move my name tag table at orientation out to the staff parking lot, Howie. That's a good idea because ours drive in and we have like greeters and things, but if they had their name tag already when they're walking into the main part, that's pretty cool. I like that. Nelson, something that I thought about when you were talking about this was when you said identifying and cultivating the weak links being so important, and like why people don't return is feeling not connected to the space. And what I thought about is like no matter how hard we sometimes try, there always do seem to be some staff that are kind of some outliers of like don't have strong connections with other staff or feel like they haven't found like their people. And I'm not saying everyone has to find their best friends at camp, but is that something in thinking about design theory too, of some of those camp counselors or staff that just feel like maybe it's midsummer, maybe it's a week or two in that they just kind of feel there and not really feeling like they're just connecting. Is that a part of this too? Is like thinking about it during the summer, or is it really just kind of the pre-setup?
Yeah, I think I think as much as we call it summer camp, it really is year-round camp, you know?
Mhm.
I think I think I think that connection is we like run this like 3-month sprint, and then we rely a little bit on the 3-month sprint to maintain those connections for the other 9 months. And I think that is a question that is slowly both becoming more visible to camp leaders, and I think it's also slowly, as it becomes more visible, more folks are willing to like take it on as a project to figure out how do you keep folks engaged throughout the year. I think specifically to kind of like some of these outliers that you're talking about, I think as much as we could easily just kind of write them off as like this kind of like isn't for you, or maybe like it's a summer slump or midsummer slump or whatever it is. I think that, and I think it leans into this next part of kind of like these 8 levers. I think that has a lot to do with how comfortable people are with like having candor at your camp, right? And candor is, in layman's terms, is just like being truthful, you know? And some might even go as far as to say like being a little bit blunt with how truthful you are. And I think in this context, it's a little bit about how comfortable do those folks or outliers feel with actually like showing up as themselves, you know? And so that is what I think actually is the disconnect. And I think as you like get more and more numbers, it is, I will 100% admit, it is harder and harder and harder to tailor care to individuals, you know, as you begin thinking about groups, right? Because as you're talking about anywhere from 200 to 1,200 people, and like they're shifting maybe every 2 to 4 weeks, right? It is harder and harder and harder to tailor to those people. But I think the answer to kind of catching and bringing in some more of these outliers is having intentional moments where candor is like acceptable. I think the more folks you have, the harder it is to create that because there's more opinions, there are more perspectives, there's more things to be a bit more cautious of. And sometimes I'll be honest, it is better to tailor to the majority in those moments. But I think, and I'll give you an example of what I mean by spaces for candor. And so Pixar nerd here. Pixar nerd, if you are a Pixar nerd out there, Win or Lose on Disney Plus is my recommendation from Pixar. It's their first animated series. And that is actually like right in line with like talking about how do you, it's comes from, it's a view, watch it, watch it, watch it, send me an email and we'll chat. But Pixar, when they are creating movies, they call it a brain trust. And so when Pixar's directors are creating movies, and and it's funny, I'm reading, and there's 2 books I live by right now. One's called Essentialism by Greg McCone, and the other one is like just the story of how Pixar was created by, I think, Ed Catmull. And he talks about the brain trust and how pretty much there are 2 rules to this brain trust, where one, it's that you have to be able to disconnect yourself from the idea. And so when you present an idea, it is just like commonplace to understand that you are not the idea. And so when you talk about these outliers, I think those are the folks that are struggling to figure out, how do I insert a little bit of myself into this space so I feel ownership over it? And that's what I think keeps people around. I think having a sense of ownership, having a sense of community, having a sense of like I'm like needed in some way. I think people don't need to always be needed, but I think they need to feel as if they're either desired or needed or helpful to the community in some way. And so creating these spaces for candor is a way to do that, and that's one rule. The other rule is, and this one's a really easy one for leaders once you kind of pick it up. And honestly, I see leaders do this intentionally. I even tell you an example would be that the head of our school, with a very rational reason, but she like wasn't at her holiday party, right? But like at a holiday party where you're with all your staff, you kind of don't want to be there. And the idea is that no one can kind of exist in this candor of space if they have a larger profile than the group, essentially. And so an example of that was Steve Jobs wasn't allowed to be in the brain trust because of how massive his like persona was, right? Because it influences how others behave in the circle. And so being able to create more spaces for just your staff to exist and communicate and make it so that it's like a thing. It's not like, oh well, they can hang out at night in the cafeteria and we'll have cards out for them. It's like, no, like schedule a time for staff to come through and create like a little board or and a staff board. And I think huge Stomping Ground fan. Stomping Ground does this very well. Stomping Ground has like a board for every single level of community member. They have a camper board, they have a staff board, they have an advisory council, they have two like donor kind of groups where like and it's just for them though, right? And so you won't see Laura, you won't see MK, you won't see whoever is you won't see Daniel, the new director, you won't see Daniel there and in these circles because they skew how the Candor is going. And so people are my friend.
I really love we're on this topic because I think you're identifying for me personally what has been part of my journey as a camp director, camp operator. You know, many of us have gone through the various levels of being on the ground floor of some of those brain trusts as you described, right? I remember a time when I was a program director where I was in it with everybody and I was creating what has now become traditions at our camp. And man, I credit a lot of that to, you know, my entire journey at camp. But as I got older and as my role and my profile and my, yes, influence at camp changed, I've I need a little bit of reminding sometimes, but I've had to intentionally remove myself from being part of similar meetings only because people who work for you, who are supervised you, what do they want to do? They want to please you, right? So if you
Yeah.
give an idea, they think, well, that's the way Howie wants it. So therefore we have to go along that path and won't push back on Howie. He's the camp director owner when I'm engaged. And so I have my most trusted people in my team whispering to me, maybe this isn't the one you should be part of. Or because sometimes I feel like I get so excited because I think I still got, you know, I got some chops about being creative still, right? You know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Kill it,
but I
but how would be real? Like how many meetings did you have to sit in where like before someone was like, maybe you shouldn't be here? Did you have to sit in and you were kind of trying to be like a little bit of a fly on the wall and you were still realizing that there was still this pull, you know?
Of course. Yeah. And and I think I'm getting better at that. And my buddy Jeff, who's been with me for over 27 years, you know, he always, you know, whispers in my ear, or as we go into a meeting, he'll just say, you know, we're listening, and I think it's a very real thing. And I think all of us should be examining our influence and, you know, the spaces we create for people to be honest and have candor and be able to give an idea without judgment and worry that, oh, that person is just trying to spend more money or that's outrageous or this or that. I think every year my teams are getting better at it, and largely because we're kind of seeing which individuals should be in or not in some of those moments for seeking candor and seeking that kind of buy-in where people aren't feeling like, hey, this is just not a space where I can give an idea because you know what? There are about seven other heavy hitters whose ideas will be more important than mine. I think that's what you're kind of describing,
Yeah.
which kind of went to my mindset about some of the things that we're still working on because we've got an experienced group. We're lucky. We have a very veteran group of people who operate our camp. And so I think this is a great topic. And I think many of us, you know, Kelly, I think all of us can be kind of reflecting on our role of doing that sometimes very unintentional influence we have from preventing all these things from progressing.
This Go Camp Pro podcast is brought to you by Whereabouts, a new product from our friends at Camptivities. Ever had that heart-stopping moment when a camper accidentally goes home on the bus, but their guardian was supposed to pick them up? Or when you can't confirm everyone's arrived at camp until noon, even though the morning meeting ended hours ago? What about those little moments that slip through the cracks? Like staff not knowing it's a camper's birthday, or missing a special event reminder? You're not alone. Camps everywhere are saying the same thing. They need a less manual, more connected way to manage the camper experience from drop-off to pickup. Introducing Whereabouts, the only camper management system that updates in real time across 3 interfaces: parents, admin, and staff. The parent app is attendance forward and includes all the features families expect: facial recognition photos, event calendars, news feeds, and more, giving parents peace of mind and your team fewer calls to handle. One system, one set of data, everyone in sync, all the time. From knowing where every camper is, to reducing office chaos, to helping staff feel more connected, Whereabouts help your camp run smarter, not harder. Book a demo today at whereaboutsapp.io.
Yeah, I'm having a moment. I'm having a duality moment. I like it and I hate it all at the same time. I just have to say that. Like, Nelson, I'm not sure, but I am sure, but this is good. Here's where I'm at. When you talk about this, about being in the room, I think the struggle is that, like, I created a leadership council, right? So it's 3-year plus staff who want more leadership at camp, but there's still, counselors and they're doing all the things they want to do during the day, but they meet once a session and just talk about, like, what's the vibe with staff right now? How are things going? Like, what do we need to maybe work through or give more intention to or create some space for? But what's really hard is I think I'm really good at that stuff, but I'm also having a moment of like, oh, I maybe shouldn't be in there.
Yeah.
And we have like mini camp and our first week, and we pull all the second grade counselors and then the third grade, like, and we talk about like, all right, how are things going? What's hard, what's good? But oh, I maybe shouldn't be there either. And I don't like this, but it's true. Oh,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. And so that actually, and so I told you that I was listening to some of the podcasts, and I was actually listening to a podcast. It was about data. I'm pretty sure maybe it was Travis. I don't know. And like Howie and Travis were going off about the data, and you were talking about like, I'm not using data, and like maybe someone else says that, but like I'm like always out there, and so like those are like the dichotomy of the camp directors, right? It's like the administrative camp director that like really is like P's and Q's logistics, and there's like, nope, I'm in the field building that community, and not that you aren't if you're in the office as well, but like I'm like more engaging kind of socially. And so I think you are going to find it harder to kind of remove yourself if that's who you are. If that's the kind of camp director or camp owner or camp leader that you are, it is harder to remove yourself from some of these conversations, because I think it's not only is it harder to remove yourself from the conversation, it's even harder to then like completely trust and enact and kind of move forward with some of the decisions that are coming from these circles, because
Yeah.
you
Yes.
For
Yeah.
sure.
you know that these are new perspectives. You know that you also know that if you really needed to, like, you know how everything works to some degree, right? And you could like lead everyone to do their job to some degree, and be like, we got to get through this like really hard week of whatever's going on. And so you know that in your back pocket, you always have that. That doesn't go away. And so like removing yourself and also trusting these new perspectives that are coming in, and you are, as camp leaders, getting a lot of very, very fresh perspectives from younger generations. And so that's the entire point of this, right? The entire point of being able to create these spaces for Candor are to bring in the perspectives from younger generations, especially as you might be thinking about. And again, I've been tuned in as you're thinking about succession, as you're thinking about whether to bring in new AI tools, whether you're thinking about what your social media needs to look like as that landscape is changing, as you're thinking about all of those things, and it's like, who do I bring in so that I am a bit more relevant with current events and a bit more relevant with kind of the social landscape that younger generations are coming into my community with.
Yeah, I think when you say that, what it feels like to me is, being that camp director, both Howie and I are like that, want to be out. But I still feel like I have too many have tos sometimes in my day. Like, oh, I'm meeting with leadership council on Mondays. Oh, so like when you're talking about that, what for me it says is I need to step out of some of those things, empower my other leadership team members so I can have less have tos, so I can just be more present, being around, being available, and doing less of like, look like I'm cooking from one thing to another, So, okay.
Well,
I promise you, Kelly, you're not the only one, and
no,
like just
a-
like that.
absolutely not. Absolutely not. And the other thing too is that, for all of our operators listening, and we know we have the benefit of wisdom, we have the benefit of experience, and we can see, like any good coach, we can see what's going to happen 5 plays down the road. We can, and ultimately, it's our ability to balance the autonomy and the trust we have in our team versus how you apply your wisdom and your support in helping them participate. Michael Brandwein talks about the participation principle, right? You take better care of things you help create. It's the first thing I ever learned from Michael back in the late 80s. ever. I use it all the
Incredible.
time, right? So part of his early trainings, participation principle. So as we but as someone who's been, the old adage, been there, done that, how many of us have been in a meeting where, oh, we tried that doesn't work, or whatever it is, but Nelson, you're right. This idea of candor can be applied in so many different circumstances in the operation of camp, whether it be your pre-camp planning, camp-wide programming, staffing decisions, how we problem solve through a crisis. There are probably little elements of all of this stuff that, you can start to dig into through, this perspective portfolio. But even in these spaces for candor, I just really like this. It definitely gets your wheels turning
And
on,
that's the goal though. Like that's
yeah,
the goal.
yeah,
This isn't meant this is exactly what it's a theory, right? It's not meant to be a kind of like end all be all, like you need to be doing these things or you're gonna miss out or you're gonna like somehow get left behind off the boat, whatever it is, right? This is an idea on how to continually be progressing
for
as
sure.
a leader, as a learner, as an educator throughout your career as an
Yep.
operator.
And if we do it at camp, and these are some of the first examples of young staff members getting a taste of what it's like to create these spaces, their love for camp and their love for the things that camp does for them will only influence how they become leaders in their chosen professions. Like, this is a really great opportunity for us to enact some of these things, which I have no doubt that despite not knowing it was called design theory, a lot of us have been doing, as I said before. But the fact is that, and I think ultimately you hope that as you train supervisors at camp, that them participating in the modeling you're doing for this, that they can do it with the staff they supervise too. Wouldn't it be ideal for it to have this cascading trickle down effect? So that could happen. Obviously, we're, utopia, we're talking a little bit here, but the point is that if you're committed to these things, it does trickle down.
Yeah, and I would even push back, Howie, on that. I don't think it's utopian at all. I think it's very feasible and attainable. And I give you an example is during my time at TSC in the final year, we had decided we pretty much, me and the executive director owner at the time were like, we need more help in the off season. We need more help. And so we brought in a lot of our leaders from different sites. We did essentially in the fall, we did like an internship on like just the camp business. We taught them a little bit about marketing. We taught them a little bit about how we think about retention. We taught them a little bit about like referrals and all of these other things. How do we design curriculum and programs? And so now, and then in the spring, what they did was they pretty much took on all of these like projects. And so we had a media director doing our social media. We had a programming director redesigning our curriculums, and we had we had another kind of one of our directors who was in, and you'll actually, if you go to the TIC Instagram, you'll see his face a lot of things, Max, and he created what we called the Maximizer referral program. And so it's just a regular parent referral program, but like they kind of helped us and brought in some of the designs. And so now what that does though is that created not only that, like we cultivated that weak link where what was happening with retention was that the new staff or like younger staff weren't able to see the roles that they could step into because one, there was no connection between staff and directors. We introduced a role called special activities coordinator for that kind of went back and forth like that ladder position. And then being able to see that there was life that camp could improve your life outside of just 3 months of the summer with like that internship and that business development was, I think, a huge catalyst in terms of like the retention at that. If I'm still correct, the retention is 70 to 80%, right? They have now like a solid just like pipeline of folks that are coming through the program, campers to staff to admin. And I reached out the next year and I was like, do you need any help with recruiting? And she was like, no, we have so many returners. And it was great. And so like, but that is 100% like, that's why I say I don't think it's utopian to be able to design that like catalyst that you were talking about, that trickle down effect
Mhm.
of education and insight and that ownership that they now had over it and that participation principle.
One of the favorite things that you just said was like staff need to see a place for themselves to grow. and
Yeah.
to, and I know Robin Hood does an awesome job of this, and I've been leaning on Howie and his team a lot to do that more at our camp, like to build in those steps of ways to grow and, move on up if they want to in leadership. And so I think that that's so important for camp. So I love that. I love that you said that. We could talk forever about Candor. The last thing I want to say about Candor quick too is that I think for owners, directors, before we talk about recruitment, is the balance between creating spaces for candor where you're not there, but also being approachable and for people to be able to come to you and be honest also. So I do think that that is a balancing act of being present and approachable, but also having spaces where you're not there in those candor moments. So I think that that's like something that people talk about a lot.
Yeah, that accessibility piece in terms of the best person I've ever seen that taught me well too, with when it comes to just being an accessible camp operator, is Sarah Kurtz McKinnon. And Sarah Kurtz McKinnon was the executive director for Camp Algonquin, which is part of the Ann Arbor YMCA, some odd years ago, but then has just been a force throughout the camp, like just a force, just Doc Kurtz is what I call her, but and like a huge inspiration for me in my journey as well. And I remember being at a camp called Camp Tall Tree. It's a camp for kids on the autism spectrum. And I remember being very young and being like, all of my directors are so busy. How am I supposed to engage with them? And then I just see Kurtz on the beach playing in the sand. And I'm like you are, and I know like Kurtz also has like a junior counselor meeting coming up. There's like probably like we're also doing professional development for camp directors because the Tall Tree was kind of like this like huge kind of like hub for directors. Like folks from Stomping Ground were there, folks from all over like different camps came to learn a little bit more about how to create programs for neurodivergent individuals. And so I knew Camp Kurtz was like super busy when she was on the beach, and you would never tell. And so I think when it comes to like that accessibility piece, it's again kind of like again almost like using yourself as like a chess piece in this like big world of camp design, in terms of like how can you just like put yourself in a space, you know? How can you put yourself in a space that's like non-threatening almost in a way, right? The beach is not a place where I think that if I come up to you with a question or I come up to you with an insight, that I'm gonna get turned away or I'm gonna get like rejected, because you look very, very approachable when you're like filling buckets of sand and water and you're creating little canals for the water to roll through, right? And you look like me. You look like me. You don't look like a director. You look like me in that moment, you know? And so that is the connection that I'm getting. And so that's my 2 cents on kind of having that balancing act of both removing yourself from the candor, but also making sure you're intentional about the spaces in which you show up.
Right. Excellent. Really like that. I think that a lot of us listening can think of times during our summer where we probably could do better at that, if that access is important to you. But yeah, your physical space of where the space you're occupying physically is an indicator to what degree you're approachable or accessible, or what messages you are sending off. So I think that's a really great example. Want to just shift gears to design theory as it relates to actually staff recruitment specifically. We talked a little bit about our spaces and being intentional and all those things, but many of us will have a retention rate of like 50%, and we've got to hire 50% new people. And I'm just thought maybe just for a moment or two, and this conversation's been so good, just to think about advice or insight on, the acquisition of new staff, right? So acquiring people, getting them interested, having them click through something that they see about your camp. And I'm sure there's something Nelson has to say about design theory. The rest of
Yeah,
that.
of course, 100. Yeah, like you said, I'm just like, yeah, I could chat about camp or anything design theory for hours. And so, but I think, and we actually talked about this at Wake as well. And this is kind of where the conversation shifted a little bit as well, as when it called to like like real time application of some of these things. And the question that we began to answer was, I had like pulled up a screen of like ChatGPT, and I pulled up a screen of TikTok, and I pulled up a screen of like just like what's going on in the world. Like what are some of these like big kind of buzz things that, and I think where on the large and on the macro level of like where design theory kind of comes into both acquisition and staff retention is how many of these like new larger perspectives are you allowing into your community? And so what my personal opinion on camp leaders over the past however many, and I was in it, and I was very terrified to say this in this room because it was like 2,000 years of collective camp experience. But I was like, camp folks are very good at saying no. Like we are very good at maintaining the kind of culture or tradition or kind of respite or that like grandiose kind of theory of like what camp is like this like removal from all of the like chaos in the world almost in a way, almost in this like almost to go back to the word utopian. And so the question starts to dive into kind of what of these kind of new things that are being introduced that are naturally being gravitated to from some of these younger folks or from folks that don't really understand what camp is, that might not already have that like camp culture in them, right? What are they already coming in with that they're attached to, and what are you going to allow in when they come? And I think that is going to be the question that camp leaders need to ask themselves as they start to think about like, how do I bring in new people? I think to keep people is different, but to bring in new people, they don't have as strong of a connection to your space as they do to some of these other things that don't exist in your space. And so that was a question I asked, and I just posed it as like, as a camp owner, as a camp leader, as a camp director, what do you say no to? What about your community is like needs to remain unchanged as you continue to exist in a rapidly evolving world. And so like as a technology coordinator, as a video game nerd, right? I look at technology just as much as I look at camp, and it's not slowing down. It's not slowing down. And so my humble opinion is that there's a little bit of inevitability of this immersion between some of these like new tech tools or some of these new ideas or some of you could even go into like the like rapid acquisition of attention is essentially what it is. And so like this like race to the bottom for attention that is happening everywhere, right? And social media is the biggest one, but like it's happening and the way people and the way regular like not I say regular like we're not regular, but like the way like other companies or other industries recruit their staff, right? And so they are minimizing these barriers to entry, whether it be like shortening your application
For sure.
or making it so that I'm like already meeting you where you are. So you don't even have to come to my website. I'm going to reach out to you a DM on Instagram, right? Or I'm creating an Instagram social page just for staff. Those are some of the things where folks are like trying to play around with these things. And so I'm curious as we continue to have this need to continue sourcing and recruiting and staffing, I'm curious to know what camp leaders, and maybe this is a question for you, maybe I'll turn this around, right? What do you say no to? Like, what is something that you are and I think that's an easier question to ask than what do we say yes to bring in more people? It's like, what will we say no to definitively, right? We are not a TikTok camp. Great. Say that out loud. Say that out loud, right? Say it out loud. We are not a AI. I wish I could remember the name of like some of the rustic camp owners that I talked to, but like their whole model is the fact that their kids get to come and play in dirt. They're not an AI camp, right? And so,
Well, there's the we're not the posting daily pictures camp,
yeah, yeah,
right? We're not that camp, and we're not going to do it. Other camps are like, hey, go have at it. Like that's fine. But those are, I think there's more people in the industry examining all those things, right? And it's the pressure to conform or to do those things. As a day camp operator in a world where every single 4-year-old camper that I have has grown up with their parents having a monitor at their daycare of what they've been doing every day. Like, oh my gosh, like is the conversation now that we're having cameras in day camp so parents can, but these are the things that I think, are part of the, are on the menu of things that we're talking about, the phone and, you know, having the smartphone at camp. I mean, that's a common one we're talking about. But it's a lot of that stuff, Nelson. And I think that there's more examination of that more than ever. And technology, I just spoke to someone about those Meta Ray-Ban AR glasses and stuff like that.
Yep.
And, I may not be a camp that allows smartphones, but I'm going to have it in 3 years. I'm going to have 100 campers at least walking around with those glasses on.
Exactly. Do you say no to that? And how do you say no to that?
And
Because
how do you say
that's
no?
hard, right? How do you be like, and so with a cell phone, it's like, okay, maybe I'll collect it and I'll give it back to your call your parents, whatever it is. But I'm gonna need glasses. What do you do? Glasses?
Right.
Right. And that's this year, right? That's this year. Who knows
That
what the
this
next thing
year.
is, you know?
Yeah. And I think that what's served my organizations well is that whatever it is you're deciding, I'd like to think at the heart of what I do is I pride myself on being a business owner and an operator, but I'm a teacher by training. So educate, 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 right? It's like this degree to which we're transparent with our families, with our staff about the why of why we do this or don't do this. And
Yeah.
I think in many ways you can't go too far in doing that because I think ultimately parents and your staff appreciate when, it's not because I said so. It's because, this is the reason. Kelly and I talk a lot about this. It there's no easy fix to it. It takes time to communicate. It takes time to figure out which medium you will be communicating with your families on. Is it a video? Is it an email? Are they reading your emails? Are you doing too many emails so they don't know what the important ones are? So you have to find a different way of communicating. We're all in the industry being inundated with every year a new way to try to do something and determining whether this is the right thing for us, our program, our culture, our mission.
Yeah.
And
And
I
I think
and
I
it's going to
think the
get more
better you get at
challenging.
that.
That's not going to ease up.
It's not. It's not. But the better you get at that, I think the easier it is to find your people. I
Right.
think the loud I've even flipped on this. I think the louder you are about your nose, because I think how I describe it is that currently we're in an age of AI, and AI to me now stands for access and information, right? You can find everything in abundance almost in a way. And so you see younger folks are gravitating more towards wanting to understand and learn your habits than they are the information that you have. They want to know how you're applying the information that they have access to than where you actually got it from now. And so I think with that, there's going to be a sense of overwhelmed. We're going to be overwhelmed with information. I'm going to put myself in there. We're going to be overwhelmed with information, and we're going to be looking for people to help us discern
Right.
what is like good and bad. And so the easiest way to do that is to be like, no, this is like not good for folks that want to be in this community and this during this time. Right. It's not what we need in this moment.
And also as business owners, we also have to trust that the power of word of mouth in our communities, that our ability to send that message is going to make its way to other like-minded potential clients too, right? My wife always talks about the squeaky wheel and they're often a thorn in us and it has a negative connotation. But you can flip that. That squeaky wheel could be used to your advantage too, because of the way that they're your marketing piece. They're the way that they say, my kids go to this camp because they say no to this, yes to this, like basically philosophically, we sometimes, work so hard to think what medium or marketing strategy can we use. And if we just employ the people we have who are in our front row seat to what we do and love us, they can often be the mouthpiece for that as well.
Yeah, because they're very adamant. They're gonna be like, no, we don't do that out here. We don't do that at
That's
this
right.
camp. And I think what I'm seeing also working at a school is that like children, young folks are very good at saying no, are very good at being like either no, I don't want to do this, no, I don't want to say this, no, I don't want to be a part of this, no, I don't want to be on the photo, no, I don't want to be whatever it is. And so I think you're right. I think 100% that are folks that are kind of out and about and engaging with the larger kind of community at
Yeah.
scale is definitely.
Yeah. But again, it goes back to the original part of our conversation as we look to kind of wrap up this awesome conversation, is that we have the power to design some of these things. We have the power to, you know, that intentionality, of course, but this concept of design theory is just a really cool way to for us to frame these things. And we're going to make sure that all 8 things are in our show notes.
Yeah,
And,
I'll send you
and we'd
the
love to get
yeah.
some of the, perhaps even, Nelson, pass along to Kelly and I the resources that, people can dig into, and also that Pixar recommendation on Disney Plus.
I got it in
Wow.
there. I got it in there already,
100%. I
House.
scream
I
that from
got
the
it.
rooftops when I lose.
Yep,
I
I
like
got it.
And,
I
and
got
your
it.
favorite and your favorite Pixar movie is what, Nelson?
that is a good one, and I don't get stumped often. Now I got to think. I probably will go Cars.
Nice.
Cars. Oh,
Cars.
solid.
Yeah.
Solid choice.
He's the Lightning McQueen.
That's
Yeah,
my
no,
oldest favorite too. That
Yeah.
that still hits. That's so good.
Wow.
That's so good.
My
Um,
go-to is my Buzz Lightyear costume every year at day camp. So
yeah.
Okay, yeah. Toy Story was like neck and neck with Cars right there.
Okay.
I was
Oh,
right there.
okay, good.
Huge Lightyear fan. To infinity and beyond all the time.
Yes,
I'm with-
always.
I love it. Before we go to our rapid fire questions for you, Nelson, any other like final thoughts for camp people or things on your mind, things you want to challenge them to think about, and your final moment with our audience?
I think the last piece that I want to share on, and again, being from the Philly area, go Birds, and like fully entrenched in that, is that the idea of like learning circles, and I think this is really what we're like probably, I would say, like the best at is like finding each other and like and that, like, again, word of mouth and figuring out like what works, and so I think really, as you continue to do this idea of learning circles, and so Ben Franklin, greatest Philadelphian ever, responsible for things like the first public libraries, first fire companies, but he had what was called a junto. And a junto was just a group of like 50 folks that he met with weekly for like 30 years. Like 30 years on like just on a regular basis, just to chat and like have new perspectives introduced. And I think when you are talking about theories, which is what this is it's constantly evolving, and you have to mold it to fit what your camp is. And so I think that is kind of my last little bit of kind of like recommendations on how we kind of begin to tell our stories a little bit better, is to continue kind of engaging with each other in every single medium you can think of, whether it's kind of engaging with your brain trust of folks on a weekly basis, or showing up to ACA conferences, or it's maybe it's you're following somebody on LinkedIn, or right, sending a text. And I think that is truly my desire, I think, for the capital C camp community, is that I hope we realize how strong we are together when we're sharing information, when we are collaborating, when we are kind of mixing these like mixing levels, whether you're an owner or a first-time staff member, having some of those conversations and making sure that you are accessible in spaces for candor. I think that idea of learning circles, which will also be in the show notes, is a really, really important one as we continue to navigate an ever expansive world, I think.
It's so interesting you bring that up, because literally the past couple weeks, I have heard more and more about like YPOs, like young professional organizations and forums. And it's really interesting you bring that, because more and more I feel like people are talking about creating those spaces to do that. So I think that's a great challenge for the camp community. I really like that.
And also, we are the Camp Owners podcast, and a good many of our listeners are private camp owners. And I think we've been a great model for being competitors and colleagues, right? We've been able
Yeah.
to, all be successful, and ebb and flow of the camp world over all this stuff. But generally speaking, there's just a general embracing we're colleagues and we learn from each other, and we can make things work in our own spaces. And often there's enough kids to go around, be successful.
I hear that a lot.
And and I think that, these opportunities to get together, and we're going to flip the chapter into 2026, and we're now, camp conference life is upon us, where you get to see that in action, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Let's go,
And
right?
you can like almost feel like that like potential energy about to turn into kinetic and kind of
Yeah.
take off as soon as that new season here hits 100%.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's my last thought.
Okay.
Nelson has us
I love
more
it.
animated than ever, Kelly.
That's right. I love it. These are good thoughts. These are good. I love what a learner you are, Nelson. You're so curious and you're a thinker. It's awesome, but it's also still like light, and yeah, it's very good.
All right, rapid fire questions. Nelson, are you ready?
I'm ready now. I'm ready.
Okay. Favorite camp meal?
Walking tacos.
Mm.
And yeah, walking tacos specifically from LG Cook 4-H camp. It's like it's just a taco and a Doritos bag. And it's so deliciously bad. It's so greasily good. Oh god, yeah. And so I would have to 100%. It's just a taco and Doritos bag, and I never. But it was my favorite. It's easily my favorite meal of any camp.
I love it. That's our overnight meal on our overnights night. Overnight number one. All right. If you could lead any program area at a camp, what would it be?
It would be music production,
Oh, okay. S'mores, burnt or golden brown?
golden brown. It's all on the wrist.
That's right. Well, it's all in the rotation. As a camper, did you miss home and it made it hard to enjoy it? Or were you like, peace out, yo, see ya at pickup day?
It took me 3 days. 3 days. The first 2 days, and my counselor spotted it right away too, and they were talking to me, and it was clearly about just like it was really just about whether or not some of my personal needs would be taken care of. And at the time, I didn't know that my mom had already told them all of my personal needs. And so they had to like kind of like you have to like tiptoe around it and get me to say it first and all those things. But they did a wonderful job. And on day 3, yeah, I never looked back.
Okay. Got it. As a camp pro, are you happiest on the phone in the office doing the admin things or out in the action?
Out in the action. Out in the action. In fact, not only can you not find me in the office, but it's hard to get me on walkie.
Oh,
It's hard to even get me on walkie. And so that is something I tried to avoid. Like I love the idea of like living in a small community where like you kind of have to come find. It's like it feels like going up to somebody's house and knocking on the door again, like riding bikes and knocking on the
Right
door.
on.
Mm,
Love.
I like
So
that.
that's that I love to embrace that as much as I can.
I love that. Okay, last one. Favorite camp song?
And I'm a singer. Oh, I'm a singer. We'll go nostalgic. Stars in the Sky. Stars in the
Okay.
Sky is the like go-to kind of like campfire song for Camp Hole in the Wall. And so, and I've never heard it at any other camp that I've been to as like there. I've heard like Linger, I've heard
Linger.
Old Song. I could kind of continue listening them, but Stars in the Sky. Stars in the Sky. I can hear it. I can hear it. And it feels like home. It feels like home.
Okay.
Yeah.
Love that. Love that.
Me too.
Nelson, this has been amazing. Thank you for making us think. Thank you for presenting such a unique way to tackle what I think we're all thinking about. And you're a great resource, and we really appreciate you. If people want to get a hold of you and know where you're at and, dig deeper into some of the things you're thinking about, is there, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
The best way to get a hold of me is honestly right now, probably LinkedIn. Probably find me on LinkedIn, Nelson Strickland. And then after that, it would be nelson@campino.com. And the best way to find some of the ideas that I talk about with camps across the nation would be to head to www.soyouthinkyoucancamp.com. And so that is my current kind of ongoing project to continue, again, just thinking with other camp pros, and hopefully that this won't be the last conversation we have. Howie.
Best camp related URL I've heard in years. Nelson.
Oh my gosh.
Kelly, how do people get a hold of you? Remind them.
I'm still reeling about So You Think You Can Camp. Okay. My email is Kelly with a Y at hiddenpinesranch.com. I am on LinkedIn, not super great at checking it, but get me better at that. And yeah, that's it. What about you, Howie?
Yeah, similar channels. Howie at camprobinhood.ca on Instagram, LinkedIn. Really appreciate when people reach out and give us ideas for upcoming episodes and topics. So please keep that rolling. Another huge thanks to our friends at Camptivities for making this all possible. And thanks to our team at Go Camp Pro for giving Kelly and I the platform to be able to do this for all of you. Please don't forget that you can find all of our show notes at gocamp.pro/ownerspod. You can find the resources that we mentioned in this episode and lots of good stuff from our show and other Go Camp Pro podcasts there. We hope you enjoyed this. Nelson, thank you. Happy holidays. Kelly, same to you. We'll see everyone in 2026. And we're excited to bring you another episode of the Camp Owners Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to the Camp Owners Podcast. If you like what you heard, please leave us a review on Apple Music or wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, you can find our show notes at gocamp.pro/ownerspod. The Camp Owners Podcast is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network. Find a podcast for camp pros of every age and stage at gocamp.pro/podcast. Hey, Camp Pros. We love that our industry is built on sharing. In order to foster that spirit, if you've gotten even one good idea from a Go Camp Pro podcast, a masterclass, from the Summer Camp Pros group on Facebook, at a conference, or wherever else, we ask that you give credit where credit is due. That way, we can encourage camp pros to keep freely sharing their brilliant ideas and make the camp industry better. Thanks very much.